Welcome to VNN. We have a special discussion today on the new Indian film, The Kashmir Files, and how it has reignited the debate on what really happened in the Kashmir Valley through the decades, or the many decades after India's independence, and the genocide of the Kashmiri Hindus, the Kashmiri Pandits, who were forced to become refugees in their own country. We have with us Vidya Dhar of the Kashmir Association and Bhushan Bhatt. Bhushan was a professor at the University of Kashmir, after which he was forced to flee the place. Here in Canada, he is a community activist and was the president of the Kashmir Association. Vidya Dhar, of course, he is a Canadian chapter coordinator for the Kashmiri diaspora and currently director of the Indo-Canadian Kashmir Forum. He's also an IT specialist. And this will be the first part of a series of special VNN discussion on the Kashmir genocide. Welcome to VNN, Vidya and Bhushan.
Thank you, Bala. Appreciate it.
Yeah, now, so I think there has been a sudden spurt of interest in the Kashmir issue, Kashmiri Pandits genocide issue after the movie was done, isn't it, by Vivek Agnihotri. I mean, why was it so dormant for so many years? For the past 32 years, nobody wanted to talk about it. It was all swept away under the carpet. Now it's come up again. What do you think is the reason?
Yeah, you want me to start or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, let me make a small clarification. I was teaching at the university for a couple of years, and then I spent most of my time till 2002 in India, all the time. And the Kashmir problem or the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus never was dormant. It was always active, maybe at a slower pace through centuries. And then in 1931 and 1947 onwards. But it was slow, a process that was slow, but it was never seen by the rest of Indians. The difference that this movie has made, excuse me, is that it has brought the genocide under focus the way it has never been before. There were always reports about what was happening in Kashmir, but they were somewhere hidden in small corners of newspapers. Nobody made it their own cause. Nobody made it their own story. Everyone, the public, the politicians, the writers, the so-called intellectuals, the media, everyone ignored it. Till
it was because
Vivek Agnihotri lighted a fire.
Maybe because it was the political dispensation also had something to do with it. During the last so many years, they just wanted to keep quiet about it, or was it that one of the reasons?
I like to add here, Bala. Like one of the key reasons was, as Bhushanji explained it, that Kashmiri Hindus were very small in numbers. Like even today, after 30 years, more or less the number of people who fled the valley in 1990, we are more or less the same amount of people today. Our growth rate has basically gone into negative because of whatever reasons. So we were never a vote bank. That was to start with. We were not a voice. We were not a financial power, and we were not a vote bank. So we were ignored by the government, the media, the intelligentsia, the civil society, and the world order at large. So our story basically was, under a narrative, was basically, it got lost. See, I'll give an example. One of the prominent journalists of those times and currently defunct journalist, Bhatt.
Yeah.
When this happened, basically, and it has been shown very subtly in the movie. She called it a class, difference. She basically painted it as the fight between rich and the poor. She called the Kashmiri as elite people who had grabbed the opportunities, the plum jobs and the plum businesses, and the poor Muslims who were basically subjugated and tortured by the so-called rich masses of Kashmiri Pandits.
Yeah.
And it was an uprising against the rich people. So you can say history has been basically whitewashed from the Nehruvian times, and it continued basically till recent times. So that was one of the key reasons that everybody ignored it. It was not a failure. of the government of India. It was the utter failure of the state government. It was the failure of the civil society. Everybody failed us. And that was the reason it was brushed under the carpet and nobody talked about it. And of course, times were different. We were not in the social media world. The media was controlled by certain vested forces. So our story never came out. And when we left the valley, 500,000 people got scattered like a broken, garland. And we were scattered all over the world. And today even, we are scattered all over the world. But thanks to social media, thanks to our resilience, we have basically been able to tell our story. And now, as Bhushanji said, Vivek Agnihotри's movie has rekindled and reignited the debate. And a lot of truth is basically being, unearthed from, where it was hidden. That's what it is.
The Supreme Court a few years ago said this issue is all time barred and we cannot consider it again, which is a nonsense thing to do.
So even the judiciary basically ignored it.
Yeah, that's why. What is the reason behind it, you think? Why?
A lone voice.
Yeah,
unfortunately, what happened right from 47 onwards, let me go back a bit, is that all the institutions in Kashmir, all the state jobs, they were given according to population ratio, not according to merit. If somebody had to go into a medical profession, if there were 500 students who were on top, out of that, more than half would be Kashmiri Hindus. But when it came to giving seats in the professional colleges, it was based on our population. So large number of Hindus were left out and they moved out to find their own professions, and they got admissions in the rest of the country. This also was in the state government. And later on, what happened is that in 1986, there were riots in a place called Anantnag, which is south of Kashmir. And at that time, hundreds of houses of Hindus were burned. The temples were burned. The crops were destroyed. Orchard trees were destroyed. And there was vandalism, and Kashmiri Hindus were beaten up. And the exodus in some numbers started from that time. That time they did not move out of the valley, but they did move out of that. So this continued. And to come to the point of 1990, that was a culmination of what had been happening all these years. So it was not that it was not happening at all. It was happening, and it happened. It reached a crescendo in 1990.
I'll add something here, Bala. Like when we talk about terrorism is not necessarily always that somebody has to take a sword or a gun or a rocket launcher. There are many kind of terrorism, and we Kashmiri Hindus saw all kind of terrorism inflicted on us. Now, to give you an example, when Sheikh Abdullah came back into power after being in the jail for 11, 12 years, a few things what he did immediately was Land to the Tiller Act was one of the things what he did immediately. So Kashmiri Hindus who had lands, basically cultivable lands, they were snatched from them without any compensation and given to the tillers, the majority Muslim community. Similarly, they basically abolished the Moneylenders Act. I mean, there was no legality in both these abolishments. So it was basically to weaken the Hindus, and so that basically they can leave the valley. And as Bhushanji said, we were basically debarred from getting into professional colleges. Even the promotions, genuine promotions, basically, they're not given to people because they were not Muslims. Now, I'll take you to another kind of cultural terrorism which was inflicted on us, basically. Kashmiri language is a very rich language, which has given birth to two great languages in the world. One is Pali and one is Gurmukhi. The language of the Guru Granth Sahib is Gurmukhi. It came from Sharda, which is our script. And you'll be surprised, Bala, and your viewers will be surprised that we were the only state in entire India. We had 21 states at the time of independence, where mother tongue was not taught us in schools. They reduced the Kashmiri language to just a spoken language. They killed it just because the script was in Sanskrit. So there are no books, no journals, no degrees, no exams, Nothing in Kashmiri. The richest and the greatest language, which is given basically half the Vedic work to the world, was killed by the vested forces.
What is spoken now? It's Urdu? What's
So what was happened basically on the same line as Pakistan. Now Pakistan has their national language as Urdu. Whereas if you see the demographic of Pakistan, the 5 major communities there, they have nothing to do with Urdu. So it was basically, it was the master's language. Who created Pakistan? It was a bunch of Nawabs from UP who created, Pakistan. So just because they were basically from UP and the UP had the majority people speaking Urdu, they inflicted Urdu on them. In Punjab Assembly today, if somebody speaks in Punjabi, it's expunged from the proceedings. So that's exactly what they did in Kashmir. They inflicted Urdu on us, while Kashmiris had nothing to do with Urdu. And there was a vested interest behind it. Hindus will speak, will study Hindi, and Muslims will study Urdu. So there was a deliberate divide created by the education policies itself. So on our 4th or 5th period, whenever we had the language class, all the Muslim students will go into one class, study Urdu there, and all the Hindu students will go into one class and study Hindi there. There was a vested interest behind it. So what they did basically over a period of time, they made Urdu the official language for the court language.
The court language is Urdu.
The law and order language, the land record language. So eventually what will mean it that the Hindus, they have not studied Urdu. So they won't get any government jobs. So eventually they will leave the valley, in terms of better, greener pastures over a period of time. And as a matter of fact, from 47 onwards, the slow migration of Kashmiri Hindus has already started. What they did in 1990, they probably didn't have any need for it. It would have automatically happened maybe another 15, 20 years. Because there are no avenues for Kashmiri Hindus who were 100% literate.
Yeah.
So this kind of a thing had already been started there. The culmination or the crescendo happened in 1990, which had an aftermath of what happened in Afghanistan in 1990. Russia pulled back from Afghanistan. So it was considered to be the victory of, the radical Islam. So the people who were basically behind this whole, conundrum in Pakistan and Kashmir, they thought it's the right time for us to basically claim the so-called Azadi. So they basically used the same moment, and they were basically evident. Like, for example, they used to say that Roos ne bazi hari hai, ab Hind pe larzat tari hai. So those kind of slogans were raised, which had a direct connection with what happened in Russia and what happened in Afghanistan with Russia. So they thought a great power like Russia, retreated back. Why can't India do the same thing? So they basically, did the logistics. JKLF and Hizbul Mujahideen like organizations were basically, funded and, given all kind of logistics, and they created a mayhem and, created havoc in Kashmir by getting selected, famous personalities within Hindu community, so that you scare one and, you kill one and scare thousands. And within a span of like maybe some months, the entire valley was basically cleansed of Hindus in 1990.
People like Yasin Malik and all were feted in Delhi by the Congress government at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Him with honor, and they were smiling and laughing away. And although he has confessed to killing 4 Indian Air Force officers.
You see, if somebody goes very deeply into this, and if a commission at all is set up to go deeper into it, I'm sure the finger will be pointed to the politicians.
Yeah,
because the way they facilitated the, rise of active terrorism in the valley, it was all in the knowledge of the government of India. Let me go back a little. When Pakistan realized that they cannot defeat India through traditional army, traditional conflict, they devised means of, subterfuge and, guerrilla warfare. So it was Ziaul Haq who was the mastermind behind creating terrorism in the valley. There was a plan called Plan Topaz, which he had masterminded, where he trained young people and told them, you're going to go for jihad. And they went in small groups of 4 each, so that if anyone was caught also, he would not have information about the rest. So that group with very, very nefarious and with very subtle and unspoken and tacit connivance of the political establishments in the valley that time, they sneaked into the valley. And Ziaul Haq was killed in August 87, but his plan continued. And when these people came, there were also people going from Kashmir to Pakistan, getting trained. The borders at that time were porous, and they could easily go through mountains and through, they use these bakarwals who are, the people from the mountains, and their sheep and other animals, they use for taking arms from one side to other. So when I was there in 86, 87, I was there all through. When we heard the first, gunfire, we thought it's firecrackers, till somebody said, no, this is gunfire. And slowly the gunfire increased and increased and increased. And the government knew, my point is that the government knew everything about it. And when these people crossed over to Kashmir and they started killing, there was one lady, Shobhavati, who was the first Kashmiri Hindu woman who was killed. She was actually related to one from my brother's side. When they started killing, we could not really understand what's going on. The government knew everything about what was going on. And many of the people, there was still some fear in the minds of people about the administration. They thought the army is there. And people were still cautious in expressing themselves freely. But when these people were, mysteriously I think it was in 88, they released some of these people who were carrying guns. Many of these boys were arrested. And there was a core group of 70 terrorists who were arrested. But mysteriously in 88, all of them were released.
Please, yeah.
Nobody asked questions. And then it spread. And later on in December, when Rubaiyat Saeed was, kidnapped.
Stage managed.
Yeah. What happened is that the terrorists demanded that 4 dreaded terrorists should be released. I was there on that day, and when those people were released, there were shivers down the spines of all the minority Kashmiri Hindus there, because about 4 lakh people were in procession when they were, that's why when they say, oh, every Kashmiri is not involved in this, that is not true. Every Kashmiri was there, encouraging them. It was like giving them soil, giving them water, giving them every facility so that they grew.
There were roadside, cookings happening. Biryanis were being cooked on the roadside to basically provide the logistics to the people.
There's a political problem. When yesterday also, I think the Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal said, this film is a duty film. This is what the words he used. And it is not factual, and this is all BJP promoted propaganda. This is what happens in India, isn't it? How do you combat this?
I'll answer that. Like, for example, if BJP had to make any such movie, they could have done it in the last 7 years.
Yeah.
This movie has been created in, the Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora is the initiator, an intellectual logistics and research partner with Vivek Agnihotri and his team. It was the co-founder of Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, Dr. Surinder Kaul, on whose initiative Vivek Agnihotri got involved in it. And this film, as Vivek Agnihotri on his different interviews has told everybody, that this is a well-researched film. We have 700 testimonials from the victims' families and their kins. I mean, Vivek Agnihotri and his team met people in US, in UK, and different parts of India. Each and every frame, each and every dialogue, each and every scene in the film is based on a well-researched, study. They have met the victims. They have, all the subtleties in the film have been are based on well-researched. And we can see that Vivek Agnihotри's first film, The Kashmir Files, is also based on 4 years of research. So this is one part of it. Now, BJP he's supporting it. Like Arvind Kejriwal has supported some stupid movies in the past. I mean, people are now sharing his tweets on different movies from Saan Ki Aankh to every movie. And he finds this funny because Arvind Kejriwal is an anti-Hindu leader who thrives on minority appeasement, and it's clear evidence from it. And he's a snake. On air, I can say that he's a snake and the worst politician India has ever produced. But I'm surprised like how people basically in India vote him, to success every time. But we only see the part of success. Most of his in UP, most of his people who are stood for the elections, their deposits were they lost their deposits. So we don't really care about it whether any tucha politician calls it a fake movie. We know it's a fact.
It's a fact. Yeah.
Millions of people who are watching this film are crying. Does Arvind Kejriwal mean that these are fake, tears?
Emotions?
These are fake emotions. I mean, you cannot buy emotions, or no party or no business class can basically buy people's emotions and their tears. In Canada, I had a Jewish young man who had tears in his eyes, and he hugged me and says that it's like a Holocaust. So I mean, don't look at what kind of euphoria this film has created. Auto people who make a meager living, they are ferrying people for free. Thousands of people. I mean, even in Canada here, there were groups of people who called us and said we will sponsor the film and we will basically pay for it. I mean, where does BJP or anybody come into the picture? Because people are connecting with the truth. They are feeling. A lot of people came and they apologized to a lot of Kashmiri Hindus here in Canada.
Yes.
That they're feeling bad about it. That such a disaster happened in independent India's history, and we didn't know anything about it. Where were we at that time? So we really don't care about it. It's a pictorial description. It is a well-researched, film, and we will challenge anybody who calls it a false narrative.
Kejriwal also is a compulsive liar, as you would know from his history. But he is a convincing liar for a time. But ultimately, he's caught. Like he told so many lies against a lot of politicians. And when they went after him in the courts, he had to apologize to 36 people, including Jet Li and including the Prime Minister, for the lies he had been telling. Oh, here's the proof. He is a corrupt guy. He has taken 20 lakhs. Here is the proof. He would just wave papers and everything. But when he was challenged in the court, he had to fall at their feet. And in this, he will also fall at the feet of people of Kashmir one day, and he will have to for the lies he's trying to create on this film.
The Sikhs and the Buddhists in the Kashmir Valley, I mean, they were also driven out, many of them.
Let me answer that. Let me answer that because I have a peep into that. I know that some of the people have said on television that Jains, Buddhists, and Sikhs, why did they not leave? Now, first of all, there are no Jains and Buddhists in the valley. There were only Buddhists in Ladakh, but I had no class fellow who was a Jain, and I have not seen any Jain groups or any Jain residents in that. As far as Sikhs are concerned, initially when I was there, if you see the initial documentaries on the refugee camps, you'll find some Sikhs there, right? So they also, in proportion, they left the valley at that time. But soon, the Akas from Pakistan, they had a conversation with Khalistanis or Khalistani sympathizers who were still active and are still active. And Khalistani sympathizers and active Khalistani members told ISI that if you drive out Sikhs, it will not be bad, it will not be good for you. So soon Sikhs realized that they are not the target. They were not the target. That also proves the point that our community was the target, not because of anything else, but because of what we stand for, the religion that we stand for. So those Sikhs who were refugees in Jammu, they went back. But any Kashmiri who went back, Kashmiri Hindu who went back, I have relatives who went back who had big establishments. One of them was a very big wholesale cloth merchant. He was an elderly guy. It's a family business. There were about 10 brothers running that business. They were supplying the cloth, all the entire valley. So he went there somewhere in 93, 94, and he was in a room. He sort of tried to make friends with others. He spent 2-3 months. And after 3 or 4 months, he said, can I open my wholesale business again? And with maybe there were a couple of guys who told him, go ahead. And the moment he opened, everyone came back to him. You can come here as a visitor, but you cannot open your business. You'll have to go back or you'll be dead. So he had to leave. That is a fundamental difference between, anyone else or Sikhs or others. The Sikhs were never the target. And they were much smaller population than Kashmiri Hindus.
Now, are there a lot of refugee camps in Jammu?
Oh, still, yes. They are now 1-room, 2-room tenements, but basically refugee camps, yes.
Initially, they were tents.
They were tents.
For many, many years.
There was a tent of, I forget the name of the place, of 1,000 people who were Kashmiri Hindus. And in summer, they did not have a toilet for about 4 months, not a single toilet for 1,000 people. They were living in tents. And this is recorded history.
Did any of the Pandits try to go back? I mean, their properties are obviously all taken over by local people, isn't it?
Yeah, they are, yeah.
And did anybody try to go back so far? I mean,
we would like to go back anytime. We would like to go collectively to go back. That is our yearning. That is what we yearn for. But are the conditions there still when we can go back and settle down? And all thousands of houses have been burned. You would have seen on TV so many images. And they took out, the windows from the houses. It was shameful the way they did it. And then the conditions are not there yet, in spite of the Article 370 having been removed. Conditions are not good for a Kashmiri Pandit to settle down there right now.
There was
So
talk.
I'll add to your point here. Now, see, there are so many small stories, like when people left in Kashmir. I mean, it is shown on in the film as well that they literally had a shoe on one foot and just a sock on the other. There are stories, Bala, that when people had milk on the gas and they left their houses, just telling the neighbor. I mean, because they were not even allowed to leave the valley because they were considered to be a soft target, as a defense mechanism for them. So they were not even allowing people to leave. So now imagine people who have a history of 6,000 years in that valley, Kashmiri Hindus. I can recall 25 of my ancestors. Bhushanji probably can name 50 of his ancestors. Can anybody else in the valley who are the majority even name 5 of their generation ancestors? They cannot, because they are all converted Hindus. So what happened basically? Imagine when people left in 1990, there were many families whose children were supposed to get married in June or July. So they had all the arrangements. It was not a time when people will buy online things. They used to basically accumulate things over a period of time. So a lot of families went back to pick up those things. They were killed. Hundreds of them were killed. I mean, there are many examples in places like Ranawari, in Habagadal, in Bana Mohalla, in Fateh Kadal, where Kashmiri Hindus went back to basically at least pick up their, things. And when the local militancy groups came to know about it, they came and killed them. So in last 32 years, many attempts have been done by various governments to settle Kashmiri Hindus there. If you remember, recently there was again an exodus, which we call the 8th exodus of Kashmiri Hindus. There were packages created by various governments to settle Kashmiri Hindus in various government jobs. They are living in ghettos there under the security of a gun. So is that basically what we are living in independent India? So we don't want to basically go back to that part of the world.
Yeah, I know. I think we should continue this discussion maybe next week again, Bhushan and Vidya.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
I think this is so interesting, man. Many of these things, I mean, I don't know. I mean, in the media, I think they also hid all these facts, or they didn't want to publish it, or it was just buried in some inside columns of the newspaper. I mean, that's what happened. Anyway, I think it's quite an insightful discussion. And
I'll send you some posters, Bala,
Yeah,
and I'll
please
also
do
send you
that.
some videos so you can basically attach it.
Yeah, and then anyway, thank you, Vidya, thank you, Bhushan, and thank you, VNN.
Thank you, Bala.
Yeah,
Thank you.
viewers watching, and we'll continue the discussion next week.
Sure.
It's very interesting, and it should be out in the open, in the public domain, all this information.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
you.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye.